G-Core CDN is a next-generation content delivery network that accelerates your application's static and dynamic content. G-Core CDN has you covered around the globe with more than 150 edge locations and 11,000 peering partners worldwide. And of course, G-Core CDN supports IPv4 and IPv6. Go to gcore.com/packetpushers to find out more. That's gcore.com/packetpushers.
Packet pushers.
Hello, and welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Have you ever wished you could streamline your development environment setup, collaborate seamlessly with your team, or just test your code faster without some of the headaches in setting up your environment? Well, today we will talk about a solution that might just solve that problem. It's called the GitHub Codespace. We welcome back Roman Dodin and Petr to this show to tell us more about Codespace, how they've used it, how they come across it, and more importantly, how it could be used for network engineers. Roman is a product line manager at Nokia focused on SR Linux and Containerlabs, amongst many other things. Petr is an advanced service engineer at Arista. Welcome to the show, Roman and Petr. Since Roman has been on the show before, maybe what we'll do is we do a little bit of introduction on the background, maybe just a shorter version for Roman, and then we'll leave the time for Petr. So why don't you leave us off? Welcome to the show, Roman.
Hey, Eric. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me once again. Yeah, like as you said, I'm product line manager at Nokia. This is my day job title, but at night I mostly do Containerlab and some network automation for the communities.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Petr. Give us your origin story. How'd you get started? And what do you do right now for food?
Hi, Eric. So as you already said, I'm working for Arista Advanced Services and doing that for like nearly 8 years. I'm for quite some time in IT industry, like it's over 20 years already, and was doing quite different stuff over years. Like originally, I was actually like a voice engineer, good old PSTN and so on. But then something has changed and I went to classical networking. However, like lately, I'm also doing something at night, like most of automation engineer. So I'm improving my GitHub stats, sometimes doing something useful, sometimes not. And I think like to be really successful in network automation, you have to enjoy that. So that's basically the main thing.
Yeah, that's great. I really respect people who follow their passion, especially if they do it outside of normal business hours. I think that's a true indication of passion. And was it Steve Jobs who said, if you work for fun, then you'll never work a day in your life or something of that sort? So yeah, it's great to see both of you found your passion and the rest of the community benefit as a result. So I believe I first came across this solution from Roman's video on launching Codespace in Containerlabs. So can you tell us a little bit, Roman, maybe you could start off on what triggered you to make that video and how did you came to know about this? And I believe that's related to Petr as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a funny story. So I've been hearing about Codespaces for quite a while from Petr's colleagues. Somebody talked to me on LinkedIn and said, like, Petr did this thing with Codespaces. You should have a look in connection with Containerlab, of course. And I just didn't have time. So I looked at the few presentations, but I never got the idea first. And then the funny story is that we both were at AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam this May. And Petr shows up at our booth, and this is the first time I see him. So I was like, oh, Petr, nice to meet you. And he was like, yeah, let's grab 5 minutes, grab a coffee, and then I will show you Codespaces. And when he was doing the presentation, I was like, holy this is exactly what I wanted to have, right? We'll talk about this, like how we use it and what are the benefits. But I was immediately sold. I need to do this. I need to make sure that Containerlab integrates with Codespaces because I saw a huge potential how we can make a lot of lives easier by leveraging the Codespaces. So yeah, it's kind of a nice thing about our collaboration, like competing vendors here and out. But still, we helped each other. Petr showed the solution. I made the integration with Containerlab. And now the whole community got to benefit from it. So that's how it all started.
Nice. Yeah, what's your version, Petr? Was it just like, well, who is this guy? We told him about this cool things that he never take a look, and now I need to just go grab him and show him this nice toy that we have?
The version is more or less matching. So for me, it was definitely a bit longer story. Well, we also do a bit open source at Arista. So we kind of maintain our own Ansible collection, for example, which is called Ansible EVD, to just quickly build EVPN network and so on. And so originally, I was using like dev containers for the same purpose they were intended to be used, right? So to build quickly a development environment that is consistent, that you can use to contribute, to, like test things, to, deploy some small projects, stuff like that. So then I have started to maintain a container for this collection and so on. And at some point, so originally it was like a very classic container, so with Dockerfile and so on. But we decided, okay, we switch to dev containers completely. So because that's easier to maintain. And as a side effect, at some point, I saw, okay, I have the entire environment there, but I need some physical hardware to test, or I have to spawn like Containerlab somewhere on a different host. Can I actually start it inside that container? And it was just, okay, I tried, it worked. Yeah, so it's cool. There is a bigger, like technical deep story about that, which I will actually skip for now, at least. But that happened quite some time, like more than a year ago. And I was, slowly trying to promote that also inside the company, talking to different people outside, like on Red Hat events, for example, and so on, because I felt people do need that. Yeah, I have met Roman, and Roman has actually quite good influence on the community, I would say. Yeah, so I decided, okay, we just talk. So, and Roman understood the potential. And I was surprised that he was able to integrate that into Containerlab in basically, I think, 2 weeks since AutoCon, right? So which is dev containers are not super complicated, but you have to know a thing to understand all the details. And 2 weeks is actually an amazing result, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
It was 2 nights.
Then it's even more impressive, yeah.
I just spent like a whole weekend binge coding this stuff. I remember sitting at 2 a.m. And when it started to work, I said, okay, now I can go to sleep. Because, when you have something unfinished, I just cannot go to sleep. So I had to finish.
But did you already have dev containers working before? So maybe a portion of the work was done, or did you just start from scratch and say, okay, I need to go learn about dev containers. I need to yada, yada, yada.
I had past experience with dev containers, but that was, 2 years ago. And as Petr said, I used them to create a dev environment that kind of portable. So whenever I clone my repository, there is a dev container that's ready for me to spin up VS Code environment so that I can start coding. But that was 2 years ago, and dev containers made a huge progress since then. So I kind of started to read all along to figure out, okay, what has changed and how do you make sure it works with Codespaces, because that was the piece that I was missing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, I want to kind of circle back to what Petr said before on it was over a year ago that you get to know, Codespace, but I think Codespace has been around for even longer, right? So it's a stable product that's being offered by GitHub and just not being, I would say, aware until, people start picking up on it. And obviously seeing is believing. So if somebody just told me about Codespace, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I'll take a look at it when it had time. But now that I saw the demo and how easy it was, it's just astonishing. I think it's a game changer. But maybe just to circle back to what you said before, do you know how long the Codespace has been around as a product?
Actually, I don't know exact dates, yeah. So, but it was, I think, quite a while. But it was for some time in like testing phase until it was officially released. And probably we are not really significantly behind, the official release. Thing is, don't think about Codespace just as a Codespace, right? So because after all, it's a dev container that can run on any machine, anywhere. So, and Codespace is just a way to spin it in the cloud, right? And dev container, I'm personally using like for years, right? So because it's super convenient, I cannot recall when I stopped using virtual environments and all that stuff. So because, it's just so much more convenient to span the dev container.
Yeah. So how about, Roman, you walk us through what you did and your whole workflow. We're going to have the link for your video in the show notes. And I would encourage everybody to go just take a look. And it's not very long. It's maybe 5 to 10 minutes, but it will show the whole workflow. So maybe for the listener, can you tell us the workflow, describe what happens when you have a GitHub repository, and how do you go from there into a working environment where you can run some commands and code?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I will just take one step more back to start from the original idea. So as you know, we've been creating these Containerlab labs for a good number of years, maybe like 2 years. And those labs, they encode the way your topology should look like, how many nodes you want to run, what are these nodes, how they are connected. This is already a good start. So it's neatly packaged in the repo. Now, the problem is, where do you run this repository? Where do you make sure your containers can run and kind of build up your topology? And for the majority of users, it's kind of the problem that they need to solve. They need to know the VM, or they need to have a laptop that is suitable to run containers. And this problem is kind of challenging, and it's annoying to have it. What Codespaces do for you is that they offer you a way to run any code or any Containerlab lab, for this matter, like if we project this to Containerlab space, like you have a VM in the cloud. But the beauty is that all the provisioning is kind of done by dev, container, and Containerlab integration. So everything comes pre-installed. You have Containerlab pre-installed. You have your repository checked out. You are ready to run Containerlab deploy after you click on the button. The whole workflow is actually two things. If the repository has been integrated to Codespaces, and that is what we, and Petr, I, and other folks do now, if we integrate a dev container to a repository that contains Containerlab topology, you can just click on a button, and then the code space in the browser will start up, or in your VS Code. It's up to you how you want to run it. And the VM, we can call it a VM for the sake of that argument, the VM will start up. You will be connected with your VS Code to this VM, and you will be able to start Containerlab deploy on your topology. So for a user, it is kind of one click of the button from nothing to a running topology. And I think that is why we all colloquially think this is a game changer, because that's exactly what the majority of users or consumers of Containerlab labs would like to have.
Yeah. And also, you mentioned a good point about a VM, right? So even though it's a dev container that you have to start your environment with, but once you're launched, you're not limited to just running things that could fit into a container. You actually get a whole VM that you could operate. That was a surprising part for me. Do you have any insights from that?
For me, actually, I have to deviate from the original question a bit, so feel free to bring me back on track. But for me, it's actually a way bigger story than just, having this in the cloud. So because after all, as I said, this is something so I'm personally doing for quite some time. So, but I'm interested in actually a bigger thing, right? So because we have a lot of amazing open source framework, Containerlab being one of them. Actually, we should not forget Codespaces is like GitHub, Microsoft product. It's obviously, the main part of our story. But there is also like make docs. There is, GitHub actions. There is like GitHub packages where you can, build all these. So there is a lot of things rotating in the backend, and we can use them all together, right? So, and you can essentially build like a content factory where you have a template from where you generate all significant part of your content, all the workflows to pre-built containers, some of CLab definitions and so on. Then you kind of, publish that. So you publish the make docs on GitHub pages, you publish slides on GitHub pages, you publish your lab, right? So, and people can click, open the lab, or they can download the entire environment. They can run them this on their host. It's absolutely portable. So like it's, I think, a super convenient experience for myself and for any user, because I can get the same thing with all supporting materials everywhere. And one of the main reasons why I actually went to Roman and I was trying to, push it a bit. So because I would be very happy, and I see this happening. So I don't know, like maybe it will be a bit more quiet over time. But I want to see more content like that. I want to see that we all actually learn from each other. So, and this is, I know Roman is very credited. So, and, there are more people that are great at that. Yeah. So we have to share, we have to learn from each other and build these actually amazing things, right? So it's not just about starting a lab in the cloud. I think it's more than this.
I agree. And I also think that the reason that I approach this from the Containerlab angle is because that's what I do most of the times on the network automation. But then, of course, you can build anything. It can be not a Containerlab lab, but something else, something that just runs in a VM, in a machine. But coming back to your original question, I tend to think that our users, our listeners, can think about Codespaces that are running in the Azure cloud, I guess. It's just a VM. So it's a complicated thing. It may not be a pure VM, but it's a VM enough for us to treat it like that. So you were asking, can you launch things besides containers? Yes, for sure. So you have your CLI, you have your Linux shell, so you can run your camel commands, you can run KVM, you can run any software that you can install. You have apt, you can apt install whatever, right? And launch anything besides Containerlab. It's just an easy way, kind of coming back to the Containerlab story, that is an easy way to spin up a Containerlab topology for me in the cloud without paying a dime. And yeah, we'll talk about this a bit later, but this is really very, very easy to get started with labs that have been containerlabized.
Yeah, so right now you have a GitHub repo and it contains all of your code, you're checked in and all of that. How do you tie this into your dev containers and how do you make this code space runnable?
Yeah, so this is actually quite easy because the legwork has been done in Containerlab land. So we created a Containerlab dev container. And as the lab creator, if you decided to create a lab FRR connected to SR Linux or something like that, and you want this to be run in Codespaces, all you need to do is you need to create a dev container JSON file in your repository. And this dev container can point to Containerlab dev container. And Containerlab dev container on its own turn kind of spins up all this environment. It contains Containerlab, it pulls up all the prerequisites for Containerlab to run, and you will have Docker installed. So it will be a pure Docker in Docker setup. So you will have everything ready with just a single JSON file, which is pretty much a cookie cutter experience. You don't even have to think about what's inside. Just copy paste it from one of the labs that have been supported by Codespaces, and you will be good to go in no time.
Yeah, so essentially it's just this one dot dev container JSON file, kind of a configuration, which points back into all the resources in the back end. And I also noticed from Peter's repository for Arista that you could have layers of it, right? So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. The reason why I have layers of it is because, well, when you start like a dev container anywhere, so in the cloud or on your machine, so it takes a bit of time to build this container. And the best thing you can do to help yourself and the other users of the container is to pre-build it. So you can just, build a workflow on GitHub Actions and publish the entire thing on GitHub Packages, right? So everything is ready to go and you just have to start it. But the thing is, when you start it, you have to mount the workspace with your repository, with all the stuff that you have prepared for, like the Containerlab inventory, for example, and so on. And that's where you have the layers, right? So you have your main pre-built container that you consume to have it quick. The other benefit is not just quick, right? So it's not changing over time. So because you build it once and until you update it, so it stays exactly the same environment. And then you consume it to build the final container that has, the workspace mounted, and it may have some tweaks that you, for some reason, decided not to include into your pre-build.
Yeah, and I think it's very useful when you could layer. So you have one code base. If you imagine, you're on a GitHub repository, right? Like there's this green code button. And if you downclick that, most of us just, get the URL to clone it. But there's also now a Codespace section. And, Roman and both Peter and Roman have demonstrated this, that you could click on launch. And then because it has layers, so you could point it to different starting point, if you will. And then you could choose the size of, environment you want. So imagine a big Codespace that's being shared by multiple developers. Maybe the front end people needs some kind of tools, and the backend database administrator or database engineers, network engineers, they could all have their own specific requirements that's being layered down, which is awesome to begin with. And you could be able to choose different resources because, as both of them had alluded to, this is free, but it still costs, I guess, fictitious dollars or credits. It's awesome that we're able to layer them and then gear them toward different audiences, whether that's different package requirements or different stages, like what Peter, you were saying, right? Because another use case that I see this is learning, not just labbing, but learning or presentation. So you could just say, okay, if you're starting from point A, then you launch this. And then it's idempotent. So you destroy it. And then you say, okay, now you go into point B. It doesn't really matter how you messed up or how many steps that you've gone through. Then you're starting from the same starting point with everybody else. So the two use case that I saw immediately was first for labbing and second for presentations. And that's what you've done. Can you guys think of any other use case that's applicable for network engineering? Feel free to just jump in.
Actually, I want to comment about the use case that you mentioned. So because I think it's interesting because I have done that in the past, actually. So exactly like that. So like I basically was running the demo and I had like your different workspaces I was mounting to show like different possibilities you can use, right? So it was one single demo, but different workspaces. Well, one thing, we are network engineers, right? So we do use Codespaces actively to review PRs, for example, on our open source repositories, and then to test things, right? So, and the beauty of the dev container / code space, when it's properly crafted, you can kind of point that to any branch on any GitHub repository, consume the stuff that you want actually to take from there, and try the code that someone actually wrote with a new feature, or basically do anything, right? So you can have it in one repo and then consume any other repo by cloning that and mounting to your workspace.
We also have been discussing that it's a very nice instrument for workshops, because what actually we've been doing at AutoCon, we had this Containerlab workshop and we had a room full of people, 70 seats. So my task was to create 70 VMs ahead of the time so that people can connect to them and follow the exercises. And as you can imagine, that was a challenge. Even though like cloud resources and infrastructure as code make it all easy, it's still quite some substantial effort to put in. But now, if you think about any network engineer now, they would probably have a GitHub account. They might have 0 repositories, but they have been registered. And that means that they have these credits for Codespaces, and then they can run the exercises that you as a workshop leader prepared without you actually investing in the VM capacity itself. So everybody can consume against their quota, and that makes running workshops so much easier. I would like to try it next time I do a workshop. I would probably ask how many of you don't have a GitHub account, and I expect 0 raised hands, to be honest. That would be my next exercise for sure.
Let's pause the conversation for a word from sponsor Gcore CDN. Gcore CDN is a next-gen content delivery network that accelerates your application's static and dynamic traffic. It's got a global presence with more than 150 edge locations and 11,000 peering partners worldwide, and its entire infrastructure supports IPv6. Gcore can compress, resize, and convert images into AVIG or WebP on the fly. With dynamic content acceleration, websites are smoother and more responsive. Gcore CDN can protect your servers from overloads, be they unexpected traffic spikes or a DDoS attack. Your operations team will appreciate Gcore's extended API and its support for Terraform and Grafana, and your business team will appreciate the generous free plan, which includes 1 terabyte of monthly traffic and most key CDN features. Find out what Gcore CDN can do for your online presence at gcore.com/packetpushers. That's gcore.com/packetpushers. And now back to the conversation.
Yeah, explain to us a little bit about that credit system. And Roger, your sentiment. I can't think of any other way to run webinars or to run, lab environment ever again without Codespace. But tell us a little bit about, the credits and the cost of running Codespace.
Yeah, I will start from the high level and then we can expand. As I said, if you think about the VM in a cloud, there is a cost associated to that. If you go to AKS, if you go to GCP, if you go to any cloud provider, it can be cheap, but it's still some money you have to commit or put out of your pocket. With Codespaces, I guess the way they managed to do this is they're quite new, so they want to promote Codespaces as a tool, as a way to run remote development or kind of platform that's always available for you. They give each user a set of credits, a set of quotas, as they call it in their billing plans. So any user of GitHub, anybody who has a registered account, and it doesn't need to be a pro account, just a regular free account that anybody can register in a couple of seconds, will give you 120 CPU hours for free each month, 15 gigabytes of storage, and this quota is reset monthly, right? So you can consume all of that until 31st or 30th of a particular month, and then it will be reset. Now, what does it mean, 120 CPU hours? Because when I first saw it, I was like, how do I see if I actually get to pay anything once I'm done? Well, each time you run a Codespaces, when you click on a button, run something in Codespaces, they will ask what kind of a host you would like to run it on. And they have kind of pre-fit or pre-tailored environments. 2 vCPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, 4 vCPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, and so on and so forth. So you probably now have 6 or 5 different types of VMs that you can run it on. So that means that when you run a 2 vCPU machine for 2 hours, you will consume 4 CPU hours, right? So simple math, nothing too crazy about. Storage is a bit different. So storage is something that probably somebody would need to look at and understand how it all works. But storage never is the bottleneck when you run labs. So it's always CPU hours that you will pay attention to. And storage is not that pressing on you. But then the great thing is that you will never, ever pay anything unless you click a button that you would like to put a credit card to your Codespaces account. So 120 CPU hours, 15 gigs of storage is free for you, and you don't even need to have a credit card to begin with. And only when you want to say, okay, I'm so bought with this Codespaces story, I want to run it more than my quota allows me to, then you can put your credit card on, and then they will start bill you on top of your quota that you exceed. And the billing plan is really generous. I guess for each CPU hour, it's kind of 20 cents or something like this. Yeah, it's nothing. If you think about GCP or AWS, I think it's more costly to run it there. And of course, considering that you have 120 CPU hours each month for free, that is a no-brainer to me.
The only thing I want to add on top of that is users probably will be also asked to put the credit card in there if they want a bigger machine. Yeah, so because I was talking to some colleagues who were registering like as a new users, right? So if you ask GitHub support, by default, you will get like 4 vCPUs or something like that. Yeah, so if you want a bigger machine, and most likely you do, they will answer you that you have to add your credit card, but we will not charge you, and they will not charge you for that. Yeah, so it's just, whatever rules actually they have internally. The fun fact, and I don't know what is Roman experience, but I'm using Codespaces quite actively. And I have actually credit card signed, and I have like non-zero spending limit, like $50 a month or something like this. I have been charged by GitHub twice for an amount less than $1, which is like tells you something. Yeah, I mean, the only thing how you can probably go over this limit easily, they have like a monster machine with I don't know how many actually cores, but it's 128 RAM. I think it's 32 cores. Yeah, exactly. So, and if you start this machine for whatever exercise you need, it will start, like consuming this free quota very quick. So, and of course, you might actually run over it. So, but you rarely need that, and you like start, stop the machine. So it's really quite efficient way, I would say.
I also like it how, which is quite unusual for a cloud provider, they try to protect your money by giving you instruments to put the gaps or gates on top of your consumption. So you can say, whenever I'm inactive for 10 minutes, kill my Codespace lab because I don't need it, right? And that's hilarious because I might want to, go and answer the door and I'm talking to my colleague and I forget that my quota is exceeding. So they will kill it for you. If you have a VM that's been on pause for a day or some other interval that you can set in the settings, they will delete it, so it will not count against your storage quota. So there's a lot of things that they can, and they do by default, make it safe to use, which I guess for a lot of users is a good sign. So you can try this thing without being scared that you will spend, $1,000 for nothing. So that is really a convincing story to try Codespaces, at least to me.
One interesting opinion I had heard, or maybe like a concern, a question, I don't know, is like some people, when they first actually saw that, they were asking, okay, like, but how Microsoft actually earns money, right? So they might be, making that as a promotion, and they might actually change something in the future. Well, I mean, I think that, of course, is a possibility, but why people are not concerned about actually bigger things? So because I think Microsoft has such a powerful infrastructure that is powering entire open source community. And actually, I think they give much more resources to all the GitHub workflows that are running for every single public repo for free. So I think the Codespace is just, a minor thing for them. And I think it's incredible so how much they contribute towards the open source. They even have some offers like promotions for universities and so on. And I think university can get even bigger quota for free if they actually want to.
I would agree, right? Microsoft spends more on marketing and sponsorship and all these open source contributions that they don't really care about it. It's almost like they're trying to take away the veto power and just let people not worry about the financials. Like you said, Roman, first of all, you don't need a credit card to start using it, as opposed to like AWS, right? Like when you sign up an AWS account, at least in the US, you need to have a mobile phone number that they could text you, and you at least need to put in a credit card. Then you could set a spending limit where if you exceeded that, you don't use anything. And then there's a few guardrails that you mentioned on, instantly delete your code space if it's been idle for a while and so on and so forth. So it's almost like they try to take away all the veto power. They just want you to use it. And they want you to use it, to love it, be addicted to it. And then, they will start making money. It's almost like YouTube, right? Why is YouTube free? Well, they make money on the back end on something else that, your 0.01% of power users, because the overhead is so low, they're able to compensate for all of that. So totally agree. There's just no reason not to try it, especially if you already have 90% of the things ready. Like Roman has already created an integration for you and you already have a GitHub account. Why don't you just go click that button?
It's addictive, yeah.
Yeah. It takes shorter to launch it than to listen to me rant on.
Yeah, that is what happened with NetLabs of Ivan Pepelnyak, right? So he integrated Codespaces for his BGP labs in a day or something like that because it's easy. So all the fishing rods are there, so you can just start using that. And I guess for me, that is a prime example how I would envision Codespaces to be used by content creators. If you created a lab that goes over some networking technology, create a Codespaces, and then everybody else can go and replicate that exactly as you envisioned it. That was one of the Containerlab promises, but we never sorted out the compute part. So that makes the whole experience really straightforward as an arrow.
As easy as it is to install Containerlab, I mean, you made the onboarding experience very easy and very seamless. However, they still need a few steps, right? You need to go pip install. You need to learn about the topology lab and all of that to run it from in your own environment. And now you're taking that away. It's just like, okay, instead of learning how to install Containerlab, you just go experience Containerlab with one click. And that's amazing. So I want to also cover other topics, so now we say, okay, where does it run? It doesn't really cost anything. It could be used for learning, for labbing, to betterment understanding of your technologies. There are multiple ones, even without Containerlab, NetLabs, BGP, all of that. So I want to cover some of the other topics that people might have question of, such as, can I run container images or can I run C-labs from images that are not publicly accessible, i.e., if I need to create like a token or, kind of secrets. So maybe we could start with you, Petr, because that's probably something you get asked a lot.
I think it's also aimed at like our image is partially an example of that, right? So everyone can access it. Yeah, so you just have to register on arista.com and download it and you get it. However, you cannot pull it like SR Linux, for example. Yeah, so which is a bit more challenging experience. So there are a number of ways. I mean, Roman and Ivan have created some content actually to show some workarounds. I personally think that as of now, one of the easiest way for people is just to upload it directly to Codespace. It only takes drag and drop. So because you have your Explorer in the window, you can just put their image, Docker import and run it. So the other way, which works not for everyone, but for quite a few people, is actually a token. So because like if you're Arista customer or something, you can simply generate a token, you put it actually into the form that Codespace will open for you, and you don't have to do anything. So everything will be automatically actually started, right? And also for advanced users, it's actually super simple to do things with GitHub CLI. So if you haven't heard about GitHub CLI, so take a look at it. It's actually an amazing tool, right? And this allows you to start, stop dev containers, like upload anything there. So that's another possibility. And I can tell you that with a bit of help and a bit of questions from the community, so I personally hope that we will improve over time as well and make experience for our users even easier. So it's not terrible, but it can be definitely improved in my opinion. Yeah.
And also we need not to forget that, again, this is almost like a pure VM. You can install Tailscale and connect to your home infrastructure. If you happen to run something at home, you can connect like regularly with any other VM that you have in your possession. And as Petr said, that you can just drag and drop. You have your VS Code. You can take a tar GZ archive, drag and drop it to a file browser in the VS Code panel, and it will start uploading. So the experience is pretty much as best as it can get, right? It's as simple as drag and drop experience and installing any tunneling or zero-tier VPNs that you might use yourself. So everything is at your disposal.
in my mind, it's a little bit of workaround, but it's not impossible, right? Like people have done it multiple ways. And once you're launched, you can make the experience less barrier, but still a little bit of workaround, and it's possible. But, eventually maybe we'll come to a way where that's even easier. But today, it certainly is possible. And you already have a lot of container-based NOS that you could play around with, SR Linux being one, and, CEOS being another, that you could, get bootstrapped really, really quickly. And one thing I think we kind of touched upon it, but we didn't double click on was the Visual Studio Code, right? So Roman, when you mentioned you launched, you have the choice of launching your local Visual Studio Code, or you could do the Visual Studio Code in the browser. Can you explain a little bit of that? Because I think it's pretty important for people to realize the difference.
Yeah, well, I think it's even 3 different workflows that you can experience. It's either Codespaces in the cloud using the VM that GitHub provides to you, using the web browser and the web IDE that will be your VS Code in the browser. That's option number 1. Option number 2 will be, again, the VM in the cloud provided by Codespaces, but running with your VS Code installed on your machine if you want to have like a full-blown experience of the VS Code that you get installed on your machine. Or you can launch the whole thing locally on your machine, and that would be option number 3. And then, of course, you will have to be able to run Dockers on your laptop. Of course, probably first 2 options would be the best one for somebody who doesn't have any infra on their laptop and they want to consume the cloud resources. And the best part is that the VS Code will sync your settings between the cloud instance and your VS Code that you have installed. So you will have the same fonts, you will have the same color themes, you will have the same plugins. So it will be very smooth sailing for you.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Petr?
No, actually, I totally agree. So, and I think the third option, as I already mentioned before, is also super important, right? So, because I personally sometimes want actually to run things locally on my machine, for example, yeah, and I want to see exactly the same environment. So, it's super convenient that you can actually run it really everywhere, right?
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's important to point out because some people want extra features. Like, for example, VS Code actually offers pair programming. Somebody could shadow you. So, for example, if you have a more experienced engineer and you want to have the junior engineer to drive your code, for example, then they could use the pair programming feature in VS Code. Sometimes you do code interview, for example, and you want to just run up a quick example so that people could come in and join lab. So all these features are available via regular VS Code that you could totally leverage because it's just VS Code. So I am totally sold on this solution. I think both of you are as well. And you guys both spend so much time on it. I appreciate all of the demos, all of the videos. I wish people could try it out more. My prediction is, so right now we're recording in July of 2024. So AutoCon 2 is right around the corner in a few months. My prediction is all of the labs, demos, and everything else in AutoCon 2 will be run through Codespace, or the majority of them. At least that's what I hope to.
Maybe it's not really that fast, but would be great, yeah.
And it will be all started because of you two, you visionaries that contribute to the community. We're kind of coming up on time here, but I want to make sure we cover everything that you could think of. If you could think of something else, Petr, is there anything that you want to mention, you want to cover that we have not talked about so far?
I think we talked pretty much about everything. So I think like spreading good ideas to the community is important. And as Roman already said, doesn't matter that we are working for different vendors in this case. So because we all benefit from sharing the ideas, right? So, and our customers benefit and so on. That's one important thing. And I would be really looking at more community content to be created around this great idea, around the container lab, featuring AVD, not AVD, anything, because that's what I would really be happy to see over time.
Yeah, we also probably didn't talk about the VM images that you can run there, and that is also quite important. So when you have Codespaces environment in the cloud, people might think that this is already containers or kind of a VM-ish environment, and they would ask, can you run your XRVs or your VMXs or vJunos switches or SRSs? And you still can do that. So the VM that they provide to you is KVM friendly, so you have nested virtualization support, so you can run VMs inside the VM that Codespaces provide to you, which is quite important so that you are not limited by the containerized images only. You will have to experience the whole range of VM-based solutions as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, you can use Camel in there, and that's definitely a possibility. I would still suggest, stick with containers if you can, but if you cannot and you want to run something else, that's definitely possible. And one more thing I would like to mention really quick is I'm incredibly grateful to GitHub/Microsoft. And of course, I would like to stick to their products as much as I can, but I would like to see more alternative solutions as well, allowing you the same kind of experience, basically in any cloud, any environment. That would be actually super great. So because I think there are some similar projects rotating right now. So open source, like I think GitLab was aiming in something very similar, but I don't think there is any real competition to Codespaces right now. And I hope that over time, people start building more of that.
Yeah, I think there's actually a startup that there's a Codespace for enterprises. So it's more locked down, it's more enterprise friendly, but I think they're pre-seed. And it's from the same creators who created PHP Anywhere.
I think that was, called Anywhere or something. And that is called actually Project Daytona. I was looking into that and they earned like 4,000 stars in, I think, 1 week, which is showing how much actually community needs that. So I'm watching actually this space. Yeah, so I think they went a bit different road, maybe not completely. So, but after all, actually everything you need is already created by Microsoft as shared as open source. Because if you watch how the Codespace works under the hood, is basically an Ubuntu machine, and then there is like GitHub CLI starting the dev container. So, and all that is actually available as an open source, right? And people can just start building on top of this.
That was the third scenario that Roman mentioned. You could run it, everything is locally, and you just have to, kind of follow the same step that they do. They save some steps for you, but you could repeat that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we covered quite a bit, and I don't have anything else to add, but I do have one call to action to our listeners. Go try it out, right? At the very least, go watch the videos provided by Petr and Roman and tell us what you think, right? But go try it out. I think it's so easy to try it out that there's really no reason not to. I want to thank both of you again for being on the episode today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedbacks for Network Automation, our guest today, or this episode? Send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU stands for follow-up, of course, and we do want to hear from you. Check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and so much more. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.